want to say hello to everybody who is here. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Frieda Wallison, and I'm the chair of the Pitkin County Republicans. And we are delighted to have Campbell Brown with us today on an incredibly important topic. It's important for the Pitkin County Republicans. It's important for all Americans to talk about and do something about our educational system in this country. Really the future of the country. Before we start, I would like to introduce a couple of people, some of whom have something to do with education, who are in the audience. Bob Rankin, who is the State House representative from Garfield County, and is on the Joint Budget Committee of the state legislature. And that committee gets to decide, sort of, where money is going to be spent. And a large part of the Colorado budget goes to K-12 education. Joyce Rankin, his wife, seated next to him. Joyce is on the State Board of Education, and she's a new member, and we're very pleased that she's there. She represents on the state board this congressional district, Congressional District 3. And I don't know why you're all sitting together, but right next to her is John Warnick from Carbondale, and John is running for the Colorado Mountain College Board of Trustees. There's an election for that in November, and it sort of ties into the subject we're going to be talking about, because Colorado Mountain College, CMC, plays a very important role in higher education, and obviously the training that the students get at the lower level is very critical to how they do at institutions of higher education. Anyway, with that, I would like to, the way we're going to do this is Campbell and I are going to have a bit of a conversation, and then we'd like all of you to join in the conversation after that. The first question, Campbell, that I'd like to ask you about is that you've been had a very important career in television. You were with NBC and CNN, and I'm wondering how you became interested in K-12 education, given your background.
Well, let me first say thank you to Frieda, who has been so wonderful to invite me here. I've been coming to Snowmass since I was 2. My grandfather bought a condo on Fanny Hill about 50 years ago and taught me to ski, tying a rope around my waist. Is that better? Yes? Yes. Tying a rope around my waist and pushing me down the mountain at age 2. And so I'm now doing the same thing with my 2 little kids and trying to get them out here as much as possible. So it's really, really nice to be here this summer. I got interested in education for a very simple reason. I became a mother. I was at NBC News for 11 years. I covered everything, I guess, while I was there. I was White House correspondent for 3 years and did most of my career doing political coverage for NBC. And then I left NBC and hosted a show on CNN for about 3 years at 8 o'clock at night, which was quite a challenge. I was pregnant or breastfeeding the entire time I hosted that show on CNN, and actually I do remember moderating a presidential debate between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama in 2008, where I had to pump about 10 minutes before the debate, right before I went on stage, and I think that was one of those moments where I thought, I might be ready for a change. So I did, my kids were little and the schedule was killing me. I left CNN after about 3 years. And I wanted to kind of keep a toe in things. I had become interested in education while I was at CNN. I did a lot on the subject. And I started writing about it. And I'll tell you a story that really sort of woke me up to what was going on in public education and the inequality of it in particular. And I'm going to change a few parts of this story because I want to protect my friend. But I had a friend who was a makeup artist at CNN. She was a very close friend of mine. We worked together for almost 10 years. She was at NBC with me too. And she didn't make a lot of money doing makeup. She was a single mom. She had a little boy who was just about 2 years older than my little boy. And she did my makeup every night before the show. And she came into work one day and she was in a panic because her little boy was now school age. And she was trying to figure out where he was going to go to school. And she had just found out that the public school in her neighborhood in the Bronx, where she lived at the time, was the school she was zoned for was one of the worst public schools in the city of New York. And I knew her child. She used to bring him into work a lot and sit in my lap while she did my makeup. I couldn't picture this little boy at this failing school that was sort of an infamous place. And she didn't know what to do, and we started researching at the time charter schools. I didn't even know what a charter school was at the time. And to go to a charter school, it's done by lottery. She applied, she didn't get in. She was on a lottery, a charter school wait list. And she didn't know what to do. She looked at the Catholic school nearby. She couldn't afford that. And she came into work one day. She had a big smile on her face, and she was like, I figured it out. I figured out what I'm going to do with her son's education. I was like, what? And she said, I cut a deal with so-and-so, this woman we both knew who lived on the Upper East Side, who had a lot of money. And she had agreed that she would do her makeup and hair every day for free for the rest of her life, if need be, if she could use this woman's address in order to send her child to the school in that neighborhood, which was a much better public school. And I looked at her and I said, that's illegal. She said, I don't care. I was like, why would you do this? She's like, I would do anything. This is my son. I would do anything. And I remember thinking in that moment, I have a son who was 2 years younger, and I had a job on television, and I had money, and I could afford to send my kid wherever I wanted to school. I had every choice in the world. And it is very clear that school choice exists in this country only for people with money. And it's fascinating to me that the people who are most opposed to school choice in this country often send their kids to private school. And recognizing that for someone like Christine, who had every hope and dream for her child that I had for mine, was trapped, literally trapped, that she felt forced to take this step. Now, she did get her son into this Catholic school a few years later, so thankfully she's not continuing on that path. But it opened my eyes in a really powerful way to what was happening in the city I lived in. And so I started writing. I was still doing a little bit of TV and writing op-eds for the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, and I got sort of interested in the policy that made it so hard to reform traditional public schools. And I became fascinated by this law that existed in New York that is a special dismissal protection. I think you've reformed this law in Colorado. It's still in New York and California and many other states. But it makes it so hard to fire a teacher who has abused a child that what happens in many states is they will end up actually paying the teacher to just quit or go away. In New York, we spend $111 million a year paying teachers not to work because we don't believe that they should be in the classroom with a child, but we can't fire them. It's because of this special dismissal protection that gives public teachers special protections that no other public employee has. So I had read about this law, and I talked to some parents whose children had been in horrible situations where they were with an abusive teacher who could not be fired. And this was, to me, one of those things that is so shocking, you can't believe this is true. This could not possibly exist, right? So I did all this research, and I wrote a piece for the Wall Street Journal And I gave a bunch of examples. I used this example, these parents I had met in a public school in Queens, middle-class neighborhood, first grade teacher who had hit kids, physically abused children. And so the Department of Education in New York sent this teacher to anger management classes and had him pay a fine of $2,500, and they sent him back the next year to teach first grade again. So the parents called me, because at this point I'd kind of become, I guess, a little bit notorious for speaking out on these issues, and said, what do we do? And I said, we're going to call every television station and every newspaper, and we're going to have a protest in front of the school, and you're not going to go to school, and we're going to raise hell. And they did, and these parents got very organized, and they yanked that teacher out of the class. Now, they could not fire him. He is still there on administrative duty walking the hallways. It is illegal to fire him. So anyway, in my frustration, I first, before we'll get into some of the other stuff we tried to do, but I first wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal, just saying, this is crazy. And the teachers union in New York had been fighting every attempt to change this law, fighting it tooth and nail. And I just said, I'm a mother, I'm a reporter, I try to look at stories objectively. I was hired by Tim Russert, I was trained by the old school journalists, but there are no two sides to this story. This is right versus wrong, and this is absolutely wrong. Why is the teachers union protecting these people? They should be removed from the classroom immediately. And I wrote this piece, and I thought that would be the end of it, and I didn't think anything about it. And I, within the next week, was getting death threats. It was crazy, the reaction that this prompted. And it kind of, it said to me, I have a friend who is actually a columnist at the New York Times, and he tells me all the time there are two things he won't write about: education reform and the Middle East, because he gets more hate mail for those two issues than anything else. But the response was so ridiculous, over the top, bizarre, and it just made me realize, wow, this is such an entrenched group of people that they will do anything to silence you if you dare speak out about something like this. So if they're trying to do this to me, and I have a pretty big platform, having spent 15 years on television, imagine what they would do if you're a teacher in a school and you try to speak up, or if you're a parent, or if you're, God forbid, a child, and you try to speak up about something going on, what they would do to shut you up and shut you down. And it's, for some people, I think that kind of intimidation does silence them. And who wants to be in that kind of fight? They were attacking me publicly. They spent, Randy Weingarten, who runs the National Teachers Union, spent some $40,000 on a campaign last year attacking me and my children. They put pictures of my kids up all over the internet.
Oh, God.
It was insane. So again, imagine what they would do if you don't have a platform. If you're a teacher, of course they will shut you down. It had the opposite effect on me. It radicalized me. And I decided, this is what I'm going to do with my life. It did. And I thought, I do have a platform. I am able to speak out about these issues in the media because of what I did in my previous life. And I am going to use that platform. And I have used it in a number of ways. The most recent one, I know Frieda and I are going to talk about, is I just recently, about a month ago, I founded a nonprofit news site called The 74, and it's for the 74 million children in this country. And it covers education and only education, but it tries to be a voice for these kids to ensure that these stories are getting covered, that we're calling people out when this kind of horrific behavior is happening, and that we're putting these issues front and center as much as we possibly can. So I'm rambling, so let me let Frieda jump in and ask the next question.
Well, that gives us a pretty good idea of why you got into the area of education. Your big thing at the moment, as you say, you just launched 74, and I gathered that you were in New Hampshire last week with several presidential candidates. for the 74?
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that, please?
So we had, being a brand new news site, no one had ever heard of us. We were trying to make a splash and make a name for ourselves. And to me, I covered presidential politics for so long. I think this cycle is a unique opportunity to talk about education and have it be part of the conversation in a way it hasn't been in the past. If you look at every poll, political poll, people always say education is one of the top issues they care most about, but then you hear almost nothing about it. In the last campaign, Mitt Romney and Barack Obama, frankly, agreed a lot about education, and so it didn't come up a lot. Barely a mention. It really wasn't since the 2000 campaign when George W. Bush was running on an ed reform platform and talked about, you might remember the soft bigotry of low expectations. That was really the last presidential campaign where education was an issue. This cycle, because I think number one, Jeb Bush is running, he has been working on this issue for pretty much more than anything else. He started a foundation to focus on K-12 education after he left the governor's office in Florida, and has a foundation that now works with state leaders around the country on this issue. So it's a passion issue for him. Also, you have Common Core being a very controversial issue in the campaign, driving a lot of the coverage around it. Then on as for the Democrats and Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama was an education reformer. He supported charter schools. He wasn't afraid to take on the teachers union. They didn't endorse him in 2008. They endorsed Hillary Clinton. So she is a bit of a wild card here. It's funny, she, back in her Arkansas days, said a lot of the right things. She supported charter schools and she wanted more accountability for the teachers unions, but she just got the endorsement of the AFT, the second largest teachers union in the country, about a month ago, and she hasn't said a single thing about K-12 education since she became a candidate. So it's kind of strange that they would give her their endorsement, given she's not conveyed what her position is on anything. But so her being a wild card in this race, and I think there's, these vouchers and tax credits to fund school choice, this is a bipartisan issue. Martin O'Malley supported tax credits for poor kids to go to private schools in Baltimore. This is not, for a long time, this was thought of as a very partisan issue, Republican versus Democrat. It's not anymore. And so I think you're able to elevate a lot of these issues into the conversation in a way we haven't in a while. So I invited, last week in New Hampshire, all of the presidential candidates to join us, the 74, for a conversation solely about education, 45 minutes, one-on-one with me on education policy and nothing else. And it was fascinating who said yes, because it's really hard to keep going for 45 minutes on a single policy issue if you don't know what you're talking about. And so we had Jeb Bush, we had Carly Fiorina, we had John Kasich, we had Scott Walker, Bobby Jindal, and Chris Christie. All governors except for Carly. And it's because governors really do deal with this stuff. Yes, I mean, so much is happening at the state level. They're deeply immersed in these issues, and they really, I have to say, they knew what they were talking about. I was struck by how deep in the weeds all of them were, which was heartening to me to know. I don't know, I'm sure people are supporting lots of different candidates in this room, but there was nobody, Carly Fiorina, not being a governor, didn't know a lot of the policy issues like some of the others, but she came at it from the perspective of the CEO and the changes we need to make in order for to have the workforce necessary for the economy of the future. It was a phenomenal conversation, and it got enormous coverage. We had 200 reporters there covering this event. So I think it was a unique opportunity. We're trying to do it in Iowa with the Democrats. We'll see who shows up. We haven't gotten a response yet from Mrs. Clinton, who I think most people are interested in, but we're trying. So we are, that's our goal of this new site, to keep these issues front and center, but also I think the politics of this campaign are going to put them in the spotlight in a way they haven't been in a long time.
That's
really interesting. I want to circle back to your particular background in the education area and ask you about the work you've done in New York on charter schools. And you're a member of the board of the Success Academies in New York. Could you please tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I told you about my friend who worked with me at CNN, whose child was stuck in many urban areas. An incredibly inspiring potential solution for many of these families has been charter schools, and they've been especially successful in New York City. And just to define them, because not everybody really understands what a charter school is, charter schools are public schools. They get public money. They get less public money than a traditional public school. In New York City, I think the average public school gets around $19,000 per student. Yeah, we're number one in the country. And then our charters get around $12,000. Charters are not subject to the same rules and restrictions of union contracts that other schools are. So, for example, in New York, the union contract allows only a certain amount of time for parent-teacher conferences, on average 4 minutes. Yeah, 4 minutes for a parent-teacher conference. You better hope nothing's going on with your kid.
Is that over a lifetime? Is that a lifetime or just 1 year?
That's 1 year. So you have flexibility in a charter school that you don't have to abide by these rules. Teachers have exactly 29 minutes and 30 seconds for lunch under the contract. The days get to be longer with charters. We have, our teachers, we pay our teachers better. So anyway, in New York, we have seen really extraordinary results with our charter schools. I'm on the board of the highest performing network of charter schools in New York. It's called Success Academies. We're a little controversial because we launched a war against our mayor recently. But he tried to shut down 3 of the highest performing schools in the city. Our schools serve, our population, student population is about 77% of our kids are on free or reduced price lunch. So these are all kids living in poverty. And largely minority children. Our kids scored in the top 1% of all of New York State kids in math and the top 4% in English. I don't know if any of you have heard of the Dalton School in New York. It's a sort of elite private school. Our kids' debate team beat Dalton this year. I'm very proud of that. So these were, and the top scoring school in math in the entire city of New York, because it's a charter school, Bill de Blasio, who is our mayor now, was endorsed by the teachers union and basically elected by the teachers union. They are very anti-charter because our teachers are not union teachers. So he tried to shut down 3 of our schools, including the highest performing school for low-income minority students, where they were outperforming every other school in the state. So it was about the stupidest thing he's ever done, and he's done a lot of stupid things. So but it was amazing because what it did is radicalized a lot of other people like me who weren't into this issue. So I had friends of mine who called me in the media, from Tom Brokaw to Mika Brzezinski, who are not Republicans by any means, who would say, Campbell, what's going on? Why? I know you're into this education stuff. What has he done? Why did he shut down this school? And I was like, because the union told him to. It would be really wonderful, Mika, if you would have all of our children on your show tomorrow. So she did, to her credit. We put our entire class on Morning Joe the next day. And they went, the whole staff just was like, this is an outrage. And there was such an uproar and such blowback that it was a big loss for him. This happened year before. It's been about 1.5 years now since he tried to shut down the schools. And he caved. Our school stayed open. Not only that, but our governor, to his credit, Andrew Cuomo, has come in and fought very hard to win authorization for us to open 14 new schools. So we are feeling very bullish at the moment. But it's a constant battle. But I believe very much, charter schools, I'm not one of those people who says charters are nothing. If a charter school isn't successful, shut it down like any other school. But in New York, they have been, just saving lives. I think they're not the answer. It's only, nationally, charter schools only serve about 5% of public school kids. About 95% are in traditional schools. There are 1 million people nationally on charter school wait list. I'll tell you, just in our school network, we had 3,000 seats open, and we had 22,000 applications this year. We're doing everything we can to meet demand. If you're ever had any doubt about demand being there for more options, it clearly is. But it's an uphill battle. To me, they're not the solution. They're a lifeboat. We're going to pull as many kids as we can into this lifeboat as fast as we can, while we keep working on trying to fix the traditional schools. But it is an uphill battle.
Campbell, talking about charter schools and particularly their role in poorer neighborhoods and making quality education available to low-income and minority students. There was an article yesterday in the Aspen Times that indicated that Aspen High School is one of the top performing schools in the state and, in fact, the nation. We also have DeSault High School in the Mid-Valley here that gets very high marks. And with that kind of track record, I'm wondering why the folks in our area should care about education reform and school choice.
Because it is a societal issue. It's about the future of this country. And it's not just low-income kids in urban areas, even though that's what we talk about a lot. If you just look at the PISA scores, or sort of the international ranking for schools, we are, I think on the most recent, we were 31st in math among developed countries, 21st in reading, and 24th in science. So these are all of our kids, and if you are alive and thinking in this moment, you know what's happening in our economy. We're going through this massive transition because of technology that's leading to automation that is going to make a whole lot of jobs evaporate. And our entire economy is going to change. It's happening now before our eyes. And if we don't start educating our children differently, and think about how technology has changed our lives over the last decade, with our smartphones, and we bank online, we do everything. And yet, what happens in the classroom hasn't changed at all. We are teaching our children, and it's at my kids' school, exactly the same way that my grandparents were taught, in a classroom, with a teacher in front of the room, at desks. And any time we try to innovate, it becomes very controversial. Look at the conversation around Common Core. We are at a moment where the change in the economy is happening no matter what. It's our decision as a country whether we want to remain competitive, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. Uber and Airbnb, this is our future economy. Globalization is not going away. It's not, the clock is not going backwards ever. So we have to decide collectively, do we care? Do we want to remain competitive? I wrote an op-ed a couple of weeks ago that just looked at GDP numbers for even closing the achievement gap between poor kids just by a few points would have a dramatic impact on our economy. So do we care? Do we care as a country? Or not? Or are we going to put our heads in the sand? And at what point do we get to before people realize how urgent the crisis is, and that it's not just an urban poor kid problem? Our middle class suburban schools are not that great. They're C+. They're just not. So are we going to fight hard enough to get them to B+ or A?
Well, You mentioned Common Core, and it's a very controversial subject in Colorado. I don't know whether it's controversial also in New York, but Common Core started out as an attempt to establish standards, as I understand it, across the spectrum, so that kids in Louisiana were going to be learning the same sorts of things as kids in New York or Colorado. But it has become a very controversial subject, and I guess I'd like your take on it.
To me, it's been fascinating talking to people about it because it's very, to me, it's largely been dependent on where you live because it's been implemented and handled differently in every state. In some states, it hasn't been controversial at all. I think because just the way they went about it and getting buy-in from the beginning from teachers and parents and really preparing teachers, and so people knew what was coming, that it has barely been a blip on the radar. Other states, that didn't happen. Implementation has been a disaster. People didn't understand what it was. I mean, it's the conflation of so many different issues, combined with the testing piece, that there's a very normal and I think to be expected backlash. The idea, I don't think anyone in this room would disagree with the idea that we should raise standards in this country for all our kids. I think the problem came about when the federal government began using money to incentivize states to do it a certain way. Now, what I will say is, we have a number of presidential candidates on the Republican side who make this point a lot, that I was for Common Core until the federal government made, taking money for it a part of the plan. Well, that's a little disingenuous, and that's where sort of the reporter in me has to call them out. I don't care, like Ted Cruz, he's been against Common Core from day one. He has not changed his position. Scott Walker, Chris Christie, Bobby Jindal have changed their positions. They were taking that federal money for 2 years before they went, oh yeah, federal money, not good. So I have argued with them about Common Core, and I get they're like, you're defending Common Core. I'm like, no, I'm calling you out because you're not being honest about Common Core. You loved Common Core until you decided to run for president. So just, say that, and I would respect you more. To me, almost the Common Core debate as a political reporter has been about credibility. I have a hard time taking you seriously if you can't articulate why you really changed your position. So I have some respect for Jeb Bush and John Kasich, who have stuck with it through thick and thin, as I do Ted Cruz, who's hated it from day one. The ones I have a problem with are the ones who are digging themselves in these ridiculous holes trying to explain how they've flip-flopped on it. And I think I was having a conversation earlier with someone here about how just the PR around it has made it a toxic conversation for any candidate. And it's funny to me, it was a big controversial issue in Arizona when they adopted Common Core, and I guess the governor was getting a lot of backlash for it. So they passed a law and they just changed the name of it. And they just called it Arizona Core. And the whole controversy's gone away. Now it's fine. Now no one has a problem with it. So I got into an argument with Bobby Jindal a little bit at our summit last week about the new math that is the Common Core line math, which he thinks is a really bad thing. And he made this point, he's made it on TV a lot, which is, my kid is bringing home this new Common Core math, and I look at that math problem, and my kid's pretty good at math, and I can't do that math problem, and therefore my kid shouldn't have to do that math problem. Why are we teaching kids math this way? It's stupid. And I said, okay, well, that's funny. I had a different reaction. My kid is learning Singapore math, which is Common Core line math. That's not how I was taught math. He came home from school, And I sat with him when we did math homework together. I didn't know what he was doing. He asked me for help. I couldn't help him because I didn't understand it. I went to his teacher and I said, what is this? What are you teaching my kid? She's like, this is a much better way to teach math. He's going to be able to think this way and that way, and for engineering and all the challenges that our future is going to demand of these kids. Let us try to teach him math a better way. We are evolving in how we teach our kids. And so, okay, I'm a little scared of that because I don't get it, and it's not how I learned, but she's convinced me. So I'm embracing Singapore math, even though I still don't know what the heck it is. But he's not, and it was just interesting that I get why people are reacting sometimes to new methods of teaching, which aren't the way we learned. And it's hard to reconcile sort of your fear with maybe this is better for my kid, even if it doesn't make sense to me. So there's so many different conflated issues, and the testing piece is a huge problem. The tests are terrible. They've been written so poorly. There are 3 companies that own the testing market, so they're not at all incentivized, and it's a $7 billion a year industry. It's a total monopoly. They have no incentive to actually be thoughtful about how they create these tests that they might actually be valuable to you, so that you would learn something and have the data, and a teacher it would be helpful to teachers. So we have to create more competition in that universe, so that if we're gonna, I believe we've got to do some kind of testing, not what we're doing now, which has gone completely overboard, but there needs to be more competition in the space so that we're way more creative about how we're doing this, and not just putting kids through this, what they're going through now, which I think is really, in many states, not all, but in many states has gotten completely out of control.